Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today on Masechta Zevachim daf Yud. We are going to begin on Yud Amud Aleph by the two dots, about 10 lines from the top. Rav Shimon Machshir Behiluch. So this brings us to a three-way machlokus, which we had in yesterday's daf, the Mishnah, in which told us that, of course, there is 4 avodos in the Mishkan, in the Beis HaMikdash. Namely, we do the shechita on the carbon, and then we do the Kabbalah, we accept the dam in a klisharis, and then that dam is brought to the Mizbeach, and then finally the Zrikas Hadam. So, according to the opinion of the Tanakama, if a person has an improper machshava, which we've called shinu hekdesh, that you have, for example, a particular carbon, and in any of those 4 avodos, it's shlo shma, you're thinking about a different carbon, that will passel it. However, according to the opinion of Rav Shimon, he's machshir behiluch. He says that's not true, because hiluch is different. Because it's possible you could skip it entirely, because if you would do the shechita right by the mizbeach and do the zrika, so then you don't have to do hiluch, and therefore, since it's not ma'akev, if you would do it, shul shema would not passel. And then Rabbi Lezer's third opinion is it's totally if it's b'makom shut tzarich l'halech. Is it necessary for you to bring it? So if it's necessary because it would have to be shechted far away, so then it will passel. Okay. So again, Rav Shimon machshir behiluch. So Rav Shimon ben Lakish, Moed Rav Shimon ba'ilechas chatos hapenimis shemachshava poiselos bahu. Now, even though he said that when it comes to a typical carbon, that it's not going to be an issue as far as hiluch. However, when it comes to the chatos, which is brought inside, that a machshava in that situation will passel it. So that is his statement. Says the Gemara, because it's not something you cannot do. You have to do the hiluch. Since he must walk there, as he must do the shechita on the outside, he can't end up. It can't be done right inside. So that's the idea behind that. Let's see, there's a Rashi over here. So Rashi says, Shiyesh Lavatla, the lav arach ar lishchait behechel. We're not going to do the shechita inside. The al korcho hu shachto ba'azara, so you shecht it in the azara, hu maylicha behechel, and then you bring it inside, because this is again the chatos hapenimis brought inside the hechel, lekarnos hamizbeach panimi, brought into the inner corners of the inner mizbeach, hazois proiches, into the sprinkling of the proiches. So, because the chatas hapenimis is necessary to be brought inside the heichel, we're not going to actually do the shechita in there. And there's going to bloods everywhere. We're not going to do that in the kodesh. So, therefore, it had to be done on the outside, and therefore, because of that, it's something in which improper machshava shel shmo will passel. For him, Rav Shimon, kol she'enu al mizbeach hachitzon kishlomim en chayev lo mishum pigul. So the problem is that he makes this statement that says Rashi, kol carbon she'en matan damosh al mizbeach hachitzon. Anytime you have a carbon in which the application of the blood is not done on the outer copper mizbeach, lefuki chatas hapenimis, which is the chatas hapenimis, which is brought inside the zrikas hadam, is on the inner mizbeach hazahav as well as on the curtains. So ein chayev lo mishum pigul. There is no pigul. So how can he say that there's no, that when it comes to something which is inside, that there's an issue of shlo shmo? We see clearly not. So actually, he will agree that taket will passel from a kabel chaymer. It says Rashi. Now dihid ein bahen pigol l'schayv kares al chilaso avo moidahu de machshava chutz l'zmanu posalto. So when it comes to pigol, when it comes to a person who eats pigol, who has a machshava it's going to be done outside of the proper time frame, so that's actually an Issur Kares. So it's true that in this case there wouldn't be pigul to make this person like Chayiv Kares, but he admits that the machshava will passel the carbon. Why? It says the Gemara, because mashaloi lishman, a person who has a machshava shloshman shehuchshru b'shlamim. So we say it's still kosher when it comes to a shlamim, because let's say you have a carbon Pesach in November, shloshman, so it has the din of a shlamim, but paisel b'chatas. If you have the intention, it'll passel with regard to a chatas. So chutz l'zmanoi shepaisel b'shlamim. We know that if you have an improper machshava by a shlamim, shlo that you're going to bring it chutz l'zman, that it will passel for that. In udin sheyifsel b'chatas. So then certainly it will be passel. So again, it's almost a little bit of a compromise. We don't necessarily establish the din of pigul to say that this person can be chayiv kares for eating, but it will be enough to aser, to passel it. V'yashchen chutz l'zmanoi. So we just established if it's chutz l'zmanoi. Now chutz l'mkaimim menon. So how do we know if your pigul machshava is not outside of the designated time, but outside of the designated place? So as Rashi says, the chutzim kaimu nihid b'shlamim ksiv. It's true, it is mentioned chutzim kaimu by shlamim, and we can apply that to all their karbanos. Okay, so again, how do we know chutzlim kaimoi? So im chutz l'zmanoi, so maybe you can learn that from chutz l'zmanoi. Since we just said chutz l'zmanoi, the chatas hapanimis will be possible with an improper machshava. Yeah, but malo chutz l'zmanoi shechein kares. So this is a very important distinction when it comes to a pigul machshava. The only time that a person who eats a carbon in which it's pigul, in which is a chiv kares, is davka chutz l'zmanoi, that your machshava was a different time. But if it was chutzim kaimai, even though of course that is also problematic, but there's no attachment of kares, so you can't necessarily learn out from Isser from chutz l'zmanoi, which is more chomer, zachiv kares, to chutzim kaimai, there isn't. So imish lo l'shma, so maybe you can learn out from shlo l'shma, as like the Kavachim from above. No, shechein noyig b'kama b'bama, fine, that it's noyig even when it comes to a private altar. Says Rashi, b'karbin bamas yachid, when it comes to a carbon of a private bama, b'shas heter bamas, when bamas were allowed, sherishini kaidishu, there's an issue of shini kaidish even by a bama, tomer b'chutzlim kaimo, delo shemechitzas b'bama. Right, so when it comes to a bama shachid, when time when you were allowed to have a bama, so there was an issue of shlo shma, but there was no issue of chutz lim kaimo because there's no makoim, because you could be brought anywhere. It's not like specific in the Mishkan Shiloh or in the Beis Hamikdash. So there was no potential pigul when it came to chutz lim kaimo, when it comes to a carbon yach, to a bamas yachid. So therefore, we are not able to again learn out chutz lim kaimai. So shalol shman b'mai noyeg. So what do we say is noy? We apply the notion of shalol shma, but Pesach v'chatas, as we saw in the very first Mishnah Mar Masechta. When it comes to Pesach and chatas, if you have an improper machshava regarding a different carbon during those times, it's going to passel. But Pesach v'chatas b'bama will karvu. When it comes to those karbanos, we say that even the time, b'shas heter abamois, we're not allowed to bring a carbon pesach or a chatas on a bamas yachid. So look in Rashi. So be'ez a carbon also ata moitze psulo b'pesach chatas. V'hani b'bama lo karvi. a carbon chatas and a carbon pesach were not brought, as we'll see later on, much later on, almost at the very end of the Masechta. Kol hanidiv v'nidiv karababama. Anything which is has a free will offering, like a neder and a dava, can be brought on a bama shachid. V'shein nidiv v'nidiv inu karababama. So this is a chayiv when it comes to a chatos. So therefore, and also a pesach is a chayiv. You have to do it. So these things were not allowed to be brought on a bamas yachid anyway. So therefore, Yitaka could learn out from shlo shmai that it'll passel. So too by chutzim kaimai it'll passel. Okay, because it's not shaykh to ask kasha bamas yachid. There's no bamas yachid when it comes to these things. So that's answer number one. V'bois ema hakishahu. Maybe it's actually a hekesh. The pasuk says shlishi. So when it says that it's supposed to, is the whole pasuk says v'yim ha'achli yachim b'bsar zevach shalom b'yom ha'shlishi. Let's say you ate the carbon on the third day, which is beyond the time. That's chutzim kaimo lo yiratzeh. That's not accepted. L'akrav oiso lo yuchashiv lo. So you see, this is chutz l'zmanoi, and chutz l'zmanoi, there's an iser pigel, and you'll bear the avera. It's a chiyuv kares. The one who eats this. So when you say shlishi zeh chutz l'zmanoi, pigel zeh chutz l'mkoimo. The fact that we have this extra word pigel, we say that's chutz l'mkoimo to include that as well. Okay. So Omer Rava, im timsa, fine. Omer Rava, im timsalayim Rav Shimon Savala be kibaria the Omer ben ulam umazbeach safain. So maybe we could say again the whole question about where are you able to do the shchita, so that you'll then be able to skip halacha completely, so that halacha having improper machshava during halacha doesn't passel. So it depends what constitutes suffering, because some karbanos, the shechita must be done in the north of the mizbech. So some hold bein ha'ulam l'mizbech, the ulam, which is the outer room, the Beis HaMikdash inside looked like a T. The larger area was the ulam, and from the ulam room is almost like a perpendicular room, which is the kodesh, and then of course going into the kodesh HaKadoshim. So now the question is, what constitutes being in the proper direction, so that it will constitute again that was in the north, and therefore you could still do the zrika on the mizbech without walking. So if you hold bein ulam u'mizbech, from the ulam to the mizbech, is safon, is still considered to be north, right? In other words, he could shecht it right there, and therefore not need hoylacha, according to this opinion that it's considered to still be north. So ein machshava moelos b'halechas chatas apnimus, because again, it's possible by chatas apnimus, even though it's true, it's going to be done outside of the kodesh, but it's also right outside of it is pretty close to the point that you really don't need hoylacha, and therefore it's still considered to be the shechit and the safon, because a chatas has to be shechted in the north. El pesach v'lifnim. So ein machshavas molas mohilechas chatos v'nimas el pesach v'lifnim. The imtim suloimar several Rabbi Yehuda near Matay Chazara Mikdash, that within the Azara ein machshava molas mohilechas silk bazichen el pesach heichel v'chutz. So we know also that when it comes to the shulchan, which is again also in the kodesh, every Shabbos we would take out the bezichin, we would take out the frankincense, and we would burn it on the mizbech. So again, the kash is, how would one be able to avoid doing the walking when it comes to that? So says Rashi, ein safon el keneged mizbech mikir hamizbech safaini, from the northern part of the mizbech. So again, if we envision like this direction, the top of my Gemara, which is opposite of yours, let's imagine that is west, right? Which is, you're entering into the ulam, to the kodesh kadashim. and then down here is east. So the north is where the shechita of the chatas is supposed to take place, and then we have the mizbech hachitzoin, which is the mizbech and the chayshes is seemingly not in the north, but it's in the south. So it depends where exactly you're allowed to shecht. So says Rashi, in Safan el Keneged HaMizbeach, maybe north is from the edge of the Mizbeach, Makir HaMizbeach Sifaini, from the northern part of the Mizbeach. So again, you have this large Mizbeach, and then it ends at the northern point of that Mizbeach. From there on, that is considered to be Safain. Ad Koisel Hazara Safainis, all the way from where the Mizbeach ends, if you will, to the northern wall. That's all considered, according to one opinion, as north. So So then, that's considered to be an avodah which you cannot stop. You'd need hiluch there. As Rashi says, again, the korban chatas must be done in the north. L'shchita sa, for shchita. Right, so an oil and a chatas must be done in the north. Says Rashi, etc. Toich azara mikdash, kol ritzpas hazara, the entire floor of the azara, bein ha'ulam v'mizbeach, between whether from the ulam to the mizbeach, mikudeshes, it's sanctified, l'hakdir chelavim ki mizbeach atzmai, to be able to be makdir the chelavim like the mizbeach itself. So according to them, so then it says Rashi, Ein machshava muelas Rav Shimon b'halechas b'zich lechem upon. So then bringing the zich lechem upon him, shehin matirin es lechem, that's what allows the kohanim to eat the lechem upon him by burning the bezichin on the mizbeach, kedam, just like the din of blood, hamater es habasar, the kekayim it's hamater es shirayim, so they all have the same quality. The lechem is pagil b'machshavas avodas habezichin, and the bread can become pigul with an improper thought while you're burning the bezichin. Hoyel v'hein matirin, because it's a matir, just like the kamitza, just like the dam. Rav Shimon, again, the notion of pigul is b'shas achilo, so it's either achilos kohen or achilos mizbech. Rav Shimon ikra Yehuda Savarlah in machshava hayulecha moelas b'lipsol elma pesach heichel achutz, that it should only do anything from the opening of the heichel outward. Kimishagila pesach heichel ashmigil yitzias ulam. L'ritzbas azor from the whole heichel lo mahanya machshava. The whole heichel won't help. Shahari kol heichel kashul hayshiv sham shulchan. You can put the shulchan anywhere. L'sadulav ad pesach. You can even put the shulchan all the way up against the entrance. The ulam ki azara spiralan. We're saying that the ulam is like the azara itself. When the ulam l'chutz nami lo mahanya machshava b'hayulacha shahari efsher latira al ritzbas azara. Miyad, you could just do me makter it right there. Im yirtza nimsas halechas ad hamizbeach shlo tzarch. So technically, bringing it from the mizbeach, from the shulchan to the mizbeach is shlo tzarch. You could always technically, even though of course we have the mizbeach in the mizbeach's in the middle, and we have mizbeach azov in the middle, and the shulchan's in the north, but it could be put right up against the door, and therefore in the of the Kodesh, and then right outside of it is the ulam room, and you could do the zrika right there because it's saying that that it has the same status. So then you don't need haylacha. So let's see this again. So Amar Rabbi Im Tim Saloim Rav Shimon Sevel ke Baria the Aimer Bein Ha'ulam Mizbeach Safain, that he holds from the ulam to the mizbeach, which a mizbeach is technically in the west, but that's all considered to be north. So ein machshava mu'eles b'hilechas chatas hapnimis. So your machshava won't do anything when it comes to chatas hapnimis, even though again the chatas hapnimis, the zrikas hadam is supposed to be done inside by the mizbeach hazav. But since we're saying that the ulam is already considered to be north, so you could already shecht it like in the ulam, and then immediately do the zrika right outside, right inside. So therefore, the halacha is not necessary. Pesach ulam lifnim, Fine. The v'imtim salom resavik Rabbi Yehuda der metoich azara mikdash, that inside the azara ein machshava muelos v'hilech hasilk bazichin el mepesach heichel l'chutz. Because when it comes to the bazichin, that also, even though we normally would say, we would think it's pigol, there could be this or pigol of having improper machshava chutz l'zmanai, but since you could put the shulchan all the way to the entranceway, and you're able to then do the haktaris bezichin right outside, so again you don't need hiluch. So therefore that machshava, improper machshava, is also not going to be necessary. It's not going to possible. The imtim salomer savar kedushas heichel v'ulam chadahi, that's all considered like the same. Again, in machshava welas, the machshava won't do anything. El mepesach ulam v'chutz, only outside. V'imtim salomer toicha pesach lifnim. If you want to see inside the Pesach is like inside, even one step. All you're doing is just stretching out your hand. So again, since he could just shecht it right there, there's no need of halacha, according to again all this. That if you hold this din, that by not moving, even though you're moving your hand, right, is that considered to be halacha? So if you hold that it's not halacha, so in machshava welas klal. So again, if you hold that moving your hand with something here to there, that's considered halacha. That could be problematic because you need to at least do that. However, if you hold that since you don't need to move your feet, then the din is that it's not considered to be a halacha. So then improper machshava when it comes to halacha should not matter. Okay, so again, depending on what you consider to be suffering is challenging because that could question whether or not you are physically capable of being able to go from the place where you did the shechita in the north to be able to do the rest of the avoda. Let's look at question 11. Be'ez carbon moider Rav Shimon. Where does Rav Shimon agree? The machshava moelas b'hilachad stamoi, that it's considered to actually be a problem. Be'ez makom shebemikdash moelas machshava b'halichasai. So Rav Shimon agrees by chatas apanimus. So as we said, because you're not going to shecht inside the heichal, and therefore because of that, you're going to shecht outside, and therefore you have to bring it in. So halacha is necessary, and that's why it's a problem. Now, v'isvirule, and this is why we go through all of this, that maybe it's possible that even by chatas apanimus, halacha is not necessary. So, isvirule bein ha'ulam u'mizbeach, havi saflein. If you hold from the ulam to the mizbeach is already considered north, regarding being able to shech there, ein moelos machshava. Since you don't need to do halacha to walk, as you could do the shechita right there, so that machshava doesn't do anything. Elam pesach ulam. Unless you're by the opening of the ulam. Okay. The Israeli the dafka saflein l'mizbeach havi saflein machshava moelas misham. So if let's say you say that saflein is only from the mizbeach, you have to be from the mizbeach. So then that will be a machshava which will cause a problem. So again, basically the idea is that when it comes to chatas apanimus, it's possible, depending on the shita, and he's saying that we're moida, that halacha is necessary. And since halacha is necessary, so a machshava will possible. Okay, let's see. Maybe we have another question. Did I do 23? Yeah, TA 23 I did. TA 24. Boilu halacha shloba regel shmo halacha olo. So this is what we're going to get into, but we're going to see this more in tomorrow's daf. Okay, so that we will see. But let's just look at the question. Elu beis kulois, what are the two leniencies? Yesh b'mashal deloy havi halacha. So if we say it's not halacha, so this is actually, you could say this is taka part of our Gemara over here in Yudalid Amud Aleph. Let me just clean this up here. And one of them has to do with the issur of having an improper machshava, right? Let's see if he actually says that, which is 24. Do apostle machshava, right? Okay. Again, this is clearly the whole point that, let's see. Imtim Saloimer Savar Halacha Shloba Regel Lo Shmo Halacha in Machshava Muelas Klal. Right? So that really is part of TA 24, as well as TB 26. Okay, there's going to be more to this, at least whether it can passel b'machshava. Okay, TB 26. All right. Okay, let's continue. So again, what basically we're saying is when he says it's possible, it's only if it's halacha is necessary. But if you hold halacha is not necessary, then it's not going to passel. But he obviously, again, he says v'im tim saloimer savar halacha shloba regel lo shmo halacha in machshava moelas klal. So it sounds like he must hold that perhaps in that case you could hold the opposite. That halacha shloba regel is a halacha, and that's the reason why it will cause a problem with the wrong machshava. Amarle abaya moed Rav Chisda, boy menim Rav Chisda, halacha bazar mahu. So we know that shchita bazar is allowed. We know that zrikas adam cannot be done by a non-kohen. How about the halacha? So I'm like sheira umikra misayeni. I'll actually prove this to you from Sukkim. The pasuk says v'yishchatu es pesach, that the din is that we take the carbon pesach, we shecht it. Then it says v'yizruku hakohanim miyadam, and then all of a sudden talks about the kohanim do this rika miyadam, from your hands. Now, then it says v'halavim mavshitim, and the Levim will flay the animal. Now, why does it say miyadam, from your hands? It must be that you're able to do the halacha, even the non-Kohen can do the halacha, and then the Kohen can take it from the zar. So it seems pretty clear that from this pasuk that halacha is mutter bizar. So must have sheshes. He says 1 second. Zar, when it comes to a non-Kohen, this we'll see soon, v'oinen, as well as someone who is in the status of mourning one of his zayin kroivim, as we continue to Yodal Medbeis, shikr, or someone who is intoxicated, who drank too much wine, ubal mum, or someone who has a blemish, b'kabbalah, they do kabbalas hadam, they catch the blood, and here's the key word, b'haylacha, or they carry it, bizrika, or throw it posel. Now we see clearly over here that haylacha is posel, and it talks about all these different people, and the key person that we want to focus on here is a zar, is a non-kohen. So we see clearly not. V'chein yoshev, so too you can't be sitting. V'chein smile, so too if you're a righty, you can't use your left hand. You have to use your right hand, as when it comes to the avoida. So tiyofta, so obviously it's a kasha. The pasuk says clearly that you're allowed to do it, right? And the kohanim take it miyadam. So your answer is diavad masi itztaba. What does that mean? It says Rashi, they're acting like a platform. They stand in their place. Hazar etzel kohen, hamakabel, the kohen who's makabel the dam, the kohen nois the law, and the kohen can give it to the non-kohen. But he just holds on to it, doesn't move. Until the guy who's going to do this rika takes it from him. Then hazar mikarvel, what's on his mech. The non-kohen's not doing anything. He's not even moving his hands. He's like a platform that he's just like standing there, just like almost like he's like a coffee table, right? So that's all it means. When it comes to halacha, even though we just saw above, it's definitely pasul. It's actually machlokas Rav Shimon Rabbanan. Rav Shimon dir avodah sher shulavat lav avodahi sher bazar. Rabbanan psula. So it's interesting. We link the two. That if we're dealing with someone who it's a halacha that it's not even necessary. So therefore, if a halacha is not necessary, and therefore it's efshel levatel, and therefore if a non-kohen, so shalol lishma, we said it doesn't mean anything. And also when it comes to a zar, right? So too, the fact that a non-kohen does it doesn't mean anything. So it's kosher. We know that shchita is an avoda that needs to be done. You can't do zrikas adam without shchita. Nonetheless, it's still kosher bizarre, even there. Normally, no, shchita lav avodahi. Shchita doesn't even count. It's not considered to be, even though it's true, it's arba avodas, but it's not considered to be the level of avoda in which we can compare it to the others. Well, you're telling me shchita is not avoda, but yemarav zera marav shchitas para bizarre psula. When it comes to the paraduma, if a non-kohen does the shchita of the paraduma, it's possible. The yemarav Allah lazer v'chuka ksiba. On this, the pasuk says chuka, which therefore tells us that it's a chayk. We know by paraduma it's considered to be zos chukas hatayra, right? It's a chayk. And therefore, this is something which must be done dafka by the kohen. It says in the Satimosa El Elazar Kohen, right? And it says clearly that it's a kohen that does Elazar Kohen. It says v'shachat oisel lefanav. He's the one that does the shchita. So beferish, the pasuk tells us that a non-kohen doesn't do so. So b'shani para. First, you can say it's exeris akasav. B'shani para dikachi bedek abayasi. It doesn't have the same status as other karbanos. It's considered to be bedek habayis. Says Rashi, v'chiluk tamzeh einu matam avoida. Da einu kedushas mizbeach el kedushas damin ba'alma. Kachi bedek habayis. It doesn't take upon itself like the kedushas of mizbeach. When it comes to a typical kohen, which almost seems like counterproductive or counterintuitive, it says over b'kachi mizbeach the shaychim avoidais. So the idea is like this. It almost like flips on its head. But it's like the idea is that when it comes to Kachim Mizbeach, in which all the avodos are considered to be mamash avoda, so therefore shchita is not an avoda. However, when it comes to the parduma, which is not considered to be the same status of the avoda of kedushas Mizbeach, but it's like kedushas damim, so therefore because of that, they're all the same. And therefore you can't say that some is avoda, some's not avoda. It's not avoda, and therefore a zar cannot do the shchita of a paraduma. So in this Gemara says again, it sounds like it should be obvious that if kachi bedek abayis havi avoda, so kachi mizbech lav avodahi, it almost doesn't make sense. That's why the Gemara asks this as a kasha, is that Madach, when it comes to the paraduma, which we're saying is a lower level of kedusha, if I could say it that way, that's considered to be kedusha's bedek habayis. Nonetheless, the avoda, the shchita is an avoda. So a higher level of kedusha certainly should be shchita should be an avoda. So Rav Shishi Beredu Ravidi Mida Havi Modis Negoyim. It's comparable to looking at saras. The lav avodahi uba kahuna. That's not an avoda, but nonetheless you still need a kohen. There's exeris akasa basically that says that a kohen needs to be the one who examines the leprosy, the saras, not a non-kohen. It has to be a kohen. So too, when it comes to the paraduma, the shchita has to be done by a kohen, but it has nothing to do with it. The fact is, shchita is not an avoda, and therefore, you can't say, well, shchita is yafshar shalom avatala, right? No, and therefore maybe a kohen should do the shchita. No. A regular shchita can be done by a non-kohen because it's lav avoda. However, when it comes to bringing the various limbs up the ramp, the avoda, it's actually an avoda, interestingly enough, that you can be mavatal. Why? So says Rashi, that you could actually just do the skinning, the filleting, and all that stuff, and chopping it up on the mizbeach itself. So the whole notion of doing it on the bottom and then bringing it up, so the din of hoylechas ivarim lekevesh is to bring it to the ramp is not really an avodah which needs to be done. So why is it possible by a non-kohen? And the pasuk says it clearly that it's the case. This is about kirayim. Yerchatz b'mayim, that these parts are washed in water. Vikr v'koyin esakol, that it's the koyin that has to be makdir these things. Vikr hamizbecha. So that's what it says clearly. So, but why? Well, if these things, this is not even that, it should be like hiluch, and therefore should be allowed to be done by a zar. So heichad gali gali, heichad gali gali. So again, you can basically say in the pasuk, there's a pasuk. It says halachas ivarim. The pasuk says that beferish that a kohen needs to do it. That's what it says, right? Tehikriv a kohen es a koil. That's what it says. But when it comes to halachas dam, for example, deloi golibahu, even though obviously the dam we want to do the zrika, but the halacha is something which is not necessary, and there's no pasuk that mentions a kohen must do it. So therefore, we say that fact that it's efshel avatla, so because you could have just done the shechita right next to the mizbeach, therefore the din is that it is considered acceptable for a non-kohen to do. V'lav kol dechenu, again l'chayitz kavachimer maho lachazavarim kevesh dula ma'akva kapara boy kahuna. When it comes to these limbs, that if for whatever reason you didn't do the limbs, you're supposed to obviously bring them onto the mizbeach. When you didn't, it's not ma'akiv the kapara, but nonetheless, it has to be done by a kohen. So hilechas dam the ma'akva kapara l'koshikain. We know the zrikas adam is what achieves kapara. So that seems to be much more important. That transferring of that dam, which that dam has such a much more important purpose in order for kapara to be achieved, then certainly we should say a non-kohen should not do. So that's the question. That's basically the kasha. So itmar nami omer ulam Rav Elazar halachas bazar psula fil Rav Shimon. So he says you're right, Taka, that when it comes to bringing halacha, even according to Rav Shimon, he will say it is possible. Okay, all right, and then we're going to stop here because we're going to get into another kasha shortly. Let's look at question 12. Be'ez avoida she'efshel avatla. What avoda could you be mavatla? You can skip it. Goli krod de psula bazar. So as we said, that's referring to the hoylechas ivarim lekevesh, bringing the limbs to the ramp. It says clearly you need a kahuna. That kohen has to do it. And then it says ketza nilmad mimenu kavachaymer lohoylacha de psula nami bazar alpha pi she'efshel avatla. So we say by hoylacha that when it comes to halachas ivarim, that's not ma'akev, but the halachas dam, that dam is ma'akev because you need to do the zrika. Then certainly you would think that it's necessary that the halacha should be done by a kohen, and perhaps that is the din. Fine. So this now goes into question TA 24 and TB 26. So when we said halacha shlo beregel, okay, we'll see that really next time. But yeah, elu beis kulas yesh b'mad dolei havi halacha. So as we said, one has to do with the notion of pasli machshava and whether or not a zar is able to do it. Okay. All right, but that's going to be really tomorrow's daf. Ad ka.